Hello, here we are on this cold Sunday here in the Motor City of Detroit. I have my cup of coffee. I hope you have yours or your beverage of choice, your tea, your cha, your chai. Anyways, here we go again in our next episode, which every episode is a prelude. And so, in coming to terms with the concept of what is truth, I think what we have to do is leave an open door because at this point, I'm not sure I know, but I feel as if I'm improving my questions as time goes by, and hopefully you are too. And here I am with the Reverend David William Parry from the wonderful city of London, who's in a state of siege as we are here in the States. It seems to be time for that right now. And so I guess that's why we're all here. It's let's hope that we could find some humor and something to make our hearts glow in the midst of all of this. And David, how are you there, my friend?
Felicitations to you, John. As my excuse me, Latin master used to say to me years ago, "I trust your felicitas," which is always a good opening icebreaker, always a good line. Yeah, excuse me. I would just have my cup of hot water, one sip, because we had snow here, which is very unusual. I mean, London has a microclimate, so the severity of the weather is normally kept away here for geographical reasons. But today there's been a more than a slight dusting, more than a light dusting of snow. I'm looking at this lovely road at the moment that's sparkling and, of course, turning icy and dangerous at the same time. From my bay window, my brother's bay window. Yeah, it's been a strange time, a strange week. Apparently, in this endless lockdown, dishonest Boris, as he's becoming known here by all of his supporters, is now smuggling through legislation without telling anybody. So at least we're going to be in lockdown till March. At least that's how it looks. Some people are even saying to the end of the summer. I mean, why bother stopping? Just keep it going forever. Because it's clear that's what they want as they engineer markets and basically push through whatever they want. So, yeah, in this fallen utopia, in this no longer mother of democracies, because I don't know what it is at the moment, we're in some sort of weird transitional phase to whatever comes next. All my evangelical friends keep telling me this is the end. I'm beginning to wonder, but will the Almighty let us off that easily? I mean, that's we've got to say, with the amount of sin in the world at the minute, and what is sin? Nastiness, small-mindedness, unlovingness, yada yada yada. I'm not sure we get out of it quite that easily. Detroit. I mean, isn't that where Buck Rogers came from? Isn't that where Buck Rogers came from? The city of the future. Yeah, I mean, I'll pass back to you when I assuage my coughing fit with some more hot water.
Well, that's a new one on me on the Buck Rogers. I know Bill Haley of Bill Haley and the Comets. Yeah, he came from here, but Buck Rogers, I'll have to look that one up. That's an interesting thing. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Yeah, well, we're going through the same kind of thing, so everybody's trying to kind of girder themselves in anticipation of what is all this tomfoolery that we're seeing now, that they've decided that we don't get to make certain decisions, that they'll be made for us top down with the NWO in capital letters. And so I don't know. I think that what I have to do when they go large, I go larger. And I always try to remember uh, kind of the secret in keeping your basis is the quality of your heart. And my dear friend, my oldest friend, Douglas Gabriel, he's been putting together a series of chapters that's getting to where it's going to be a book that'll be freely available on the human heart. And in one chapter, I was honored to be quoted in there in the chapter Great Thoughts About the Heart in The Human Heart, compiled by Douglas Gabriel. But it's a nice quote, and he dug it out of my book. And it's on the human heart and its mission, is what I've pointing at here. But here it is. Just as love is felt as a heart force, so conscience is the action of this heart force, resonating in harmony with the life of thought. This is the still small voice spoken of in the Gospel of John, a golden seed planted from above that must be nurtured. And so, the acts of will that freely arise through this heart force, or negated, will determine the totality of your character and, as a result, your future life and being. For if you lack conscience, you are not yet truly human, not yet truly living, but only sleeping with an illusory dream of life. Within this dream, you are but merely a shadow of life waiting for humanness to arise, needlessly creating more pain and suffering for oneself and others. There are those that may never find this. Be kind to them, that they may find a way through their self-created cold world of darkness to the heart force of warmth and light of which I speak. I have pondered this my whole life, and I am convinced this is really all one needs to know in order to find a sure path to wholeness as a truly human being. And this could be accessed through their neoanthroposophy.com website. And that's the chapter Great Thoughts About the Heart. So that's kind of where I'm at about that. I feel that this whole thing is a life lesson for everybody involved. And what it brought to mind for me first, because I was like, one of our associates laughed at me and said I was wrong and that he's always right, and that things were going to turn out like I predicted years ago. And the winning actually happened, although it was never acknowledged by the people that really run things. But nonetheless, I think that kind of circumscribes the world in which we're living. And so in my mind, it made me think of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who was, I've mentioned before, is one of perhaps the greatest saint of the 12th century. And he was the great reformer of the Cistercian order. Mind you, Rudolf Steiner once said that had he not gone to the Realschule, the technical school, that he would have probably become a Cistercian monk. So that's an interesting aside that's very telling as to the power that still resonates for some people from the great being of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. And but it's interesting to note in the history of Bernard, who did, as I've said before, more healings than are listed to Jesus Christ within the New Testament. Healing blind people, making the lame walk, and all manner of healings. But one of the things that he championed, one of the causes that he championed, was the Second Crusade, and it failed. The Second Crusade was not a success. And Rudolf Steiner says that you shouldn't look at this as a mistake on his part. And so you see that the life lessons that were garnered through that, what could be called misadventure, is something of value. And so we always have to realize that even though things don't go the way we wanted them to go, as far as providing the creature comforts that we feel we deserve for whatever reason, that if it doesn't work out that way, that you still have to find your heart within the context of all that, because it's ultimately we're down here to go through these experiences and bring about the unfoldment of ourselves as universally human beings. And so that's quite a daunting task, I think. Wouldn't you, David?
Right, we've had 1 week off and I can't sync with the mute button. Isn't that pathetic? Oh, right. I'm reminded of Francois Rabelais, the great free thinker of the Renaissance, who, of course, was a friar. Science without conscience is the ruin of the soul. Certainly, the AI community in modern times needs to remember that. A dear friend of mine, Patrick Kavanagh, a freewheeling journalist, very noble, honourable man, a leftist, so we agree to disagree on certain things, rather feels threatened by the endless surveillance of London. I thought we all did. And is beginning to be threatened by AI. I'm sorry, I'm not. What do I see? I see sci-fi, funding, and intellectual fashion. What AI? What AI? It's all smoke and mirrors. I'm sorry. And yeah, I mean, in theology, all about struggling for funding. So I know what they're up to. So, science without conscience being the ruin of the soul was true then and it's true now. Of course, as far as I remember, in the Church of Thelema, which was started by the great beast himself, Aleister Crowley, Francois Rabelais became one of their saints. I bet he'd have hated that. Just because you're a humanist and a free thinker doesn't mean, you can be literally taken off the streets and told you're a saint for a completely different religion. I bet he'd have hated that. It reminded me of one thing as you were speaking. The Houses of Parliament burst into flames, or at least smoke, earlier today. If the Met Police are looking for me, it wasn't me. It probably will be next time, but it wasn't me this time. It seems to be well, they never turn the heating on in that place, which is why I always used to hate going there. I mean, I did a lot of work with the Lords at one point. By God, put your hands in your pockets. You people can afford it. Why isn't the heating ever on? And by the way, a cup of tea wouldn't harm a meeting. Heating and a cup of tea, it really wouldn't hurt, since we're speaking of creature comforts, and that mob aren't short of a bob or two. So, that's my experience with that. Next time it will be me. I hope the Met's listening to that, because those buildings clearly aren't fit for purpose and they need to be burnt down. The heart, oh gosh. I mean, a lot of my work years back was to do with the Orthodox. I mean, I got invited, as you know, John, to all of these conferences on Mount Athos. I mean, I'm not even sure how all that happened. I put a version of that story into the book Mount Athos Inside Me, but I'm still not sure to this day how it actually happened. They talk, it was an intriguing do, the World Public Forum dialogue between civilizations, very, very top notch at first. One of the oligarchs was bankrolling everything. I remember being shanghaied by the oligarch, who had better remain nameless, who'd realized I got an interest in Gnosticism and literally kidnapped me from the conference and said, right, sit here. What's all this Gnosticism about then? So I tried to tell him. It didn't sink in. I mean, it didn't sink in. I tried my best to explain what it was. And it was all something to do with, increased sensibilities and the knowledge of the heart. I mean, completely above his head. It wasn't going anywhere. So I gave up. With it after a while. But of course, the Orthodox talk a great deal about the heart and the Philokalia. I actually had read some of the Philokalia when I was a callow cub. And the great saints, I never know what I think of Catholic saints. I mean, one of my endless ordinations is, of course, Old Catholic. But I don't know, Catholic saints tend to be people that toe the party line, as opposed to those who've experienced expanded or heightened consciousness. So I get very worried about people given sainthoods in the Roman Catholic Church, some of whom clearly were saints, excuse me, some of whom clearly were bounders and just need a good horsewhipping. Because I'm sorry, you stop bribing committees to get, post-mortem credits. My heavens! But yes. So I mean, I remember that we talked a lot about the Philokalia, the science of the heart, the science of the mysticism of the heart, and me thinking the Orthodox saints, most of whom, of course, were ascetics, at least the branch I looked at, the group I looked at, you could tell there was something unworldly going on with them. I mean, yes, Bernard's great claim to fame is the healings, and certainly, as the fathers of Athos would say, at the beginning of the journey, all sorts of weird paranormal powers start to manifest themselves. But that's the beginning of the journey. And if you take interest in that, you've already admitted you're a shallow Christian and you've not taken any further steps. So, you float around on the ceiling all you want, love. Have you got love in your heart and wisdom in your mind? If you don't, forget it. So it's a sideshow. It's a stage. It's a wonderful stage performance. Good luck to you. Really lovely. But it's not to do with the depths of Christ's love, which means you're an adult in the faith. There was something somebody put to a friend of mine's post on Facebook. I'm beginning to hate Facebook, not as much as I hate Twitter, but I'm beginning to hate Facebook, more than I did, where someone was comparing science and religion. Isn't it time that old chestnut finally went the way of all flesh? Give it a rest. It's all been talked about, for God's sake. And we all know roughly that it's not this either or. We all know that. But somebody was saying there's science open to investigation. When was the last time that happened? And religion, which is blind faith. And what I wanted to say was, if you think the religious have nothing apart from blind faith, you know nothing about religion, mate. And secondly, you're talking about beginners on the Christian path. You're not talking about the mature faithful. So I never know what I make of Bernard, because I've got all these fathers of the Philokalia at the back of my mind, and all these actual Athenites that I actually met at one point. And you think, gosh, that man has his eyes on the other world already. And there's something going on there, and I can't put my finger on what, but there's clearly something unusual going on. So, yeah, I mean, we all need a greater knowledge of the heart. That was the call of Gnosticism. Of course, that's what got them into trouble. There we are. I'm not anti-Catholic. And I think the Catholic tradition is an amazingly rich and powerful senior brother in Christianity, but it's not the final version of the story. It's not got the only say. There are other types of Christianity. I always have Catholicism and Orthodoxy as sort of the Mahayana side of it all. Excuse me again, smells, bells, spectacular buildings, gorgeous paintings, and gorgeous cathedrals. I mean, they do the same thing. And I always have us lot in Free Church as sort of Zen, the austere, puritanical, more, that sort of staring out rocks in case they stare back at you. But isn't that a most people find it odd that I resonate more with that sort of Bodhidharma, rascal side of it all. But I do. I'm sorry. There are books in babbling brooks and good in all things, and as wonderful and as beautiful and as cultured as Mahayana is, you need a bit of Free Church Zen to keep your spirit together. That's my view, and I'll hand back to you, John.
Yeah, so, you keep coming up with all this, and for people that don't know you that well, you've had several different ordinations, and I mean, if you might share some of your personal journey as far as the various creeds that you've been ordained through, that'll help people understand some of your perspectives.
Right. Gosh, I'm going to have to write all this down at some point. My mother's Church of England, who passed on recently, so pray for her soul, repose for her soul, everyone, please. So, if you're Church of England, what does that mean? It means you never go to church. My stepfather was a lapsed Roman Catholic, so hey, like most lapsed Roman Catholics, he didn't go to church either. Very, very decent people, which does prove that you don't need to go to church to lead a moral life. Very, very decent, loving people. But you can't help feeling they missed something about themselves. I always thought that, those higher, more intangible qualities. When I realized the call of ministry, when I realized vocation, which was in my early teens, always resonated to the free church side of it. I was a lay Unitarian pastor for a number of years, because I find the idea of the one divine reality, the one source, absolutely intoxicating, this sparkling infinity of infinities. I think that's astonishing. And of course, Christians are, a monotheistic at the end of the day. They're Trinitarians in a monotheistic system, so it's unwise to forget that. I resonated most. I was for a decade with Metropolitan Community Church, where I seem to be on the verge of returning to, for two reasons. Yes, I'm a short, fat, puff pastor, which I'm also happy with, and also I like the fact their theology is forming. They're trying to take the treasures of everywhere and see where it's leading them. I found that very, very modern. I find them very modern and progressive in the best sense of that word. I left Metropolitan Community Church a long time back because when AIDS, HIV, finally hit London, it was here before it hit, but it hit in the early 80s, mid 80s. And I was at a funeral every week for a year. And I got to the end of November, and I said to my colleagues and my friends, I'm sorry, I can't take any more. This is cracking me. To tell you a story, I seem to have been saying it a lot recently. I don't know why. The one that got me was that a dear friend of mine was the Reverend Michael Moffat, whose partner, they were monogamous. His partner had a bit to drink at a do. Had a one-night stand, the one and only he'd ever had, and got AIDS, HIV. He didn't know that and gave it to Michael, who didn't know that either. And we saw another David. We saw David pass away. And then we saw Michael wither away like a browning leaf. One of the sweetest Irish gifted theologists that I can remember, a very, very sweet person. And that was the one that cracked me. I actually couldn't take any more after that. After visiting the hospital a couple of times and this human life literally disintegrating in front of you, and there was nothing anyone could do. I will never trust a socialist as long as I live. Sorry, Bernie, I like you as a person, and I never talk about American politics. And you do lots of lovely things, but I'll never trust a socialist again as long as I live. Where were you all? Where were you all when we needed you? You weren't there. The Tories weren't there. Labour wasn't there. The attitude in this country at the time was, oh, well, that'll only affect a few gays and some blacks. Well, they can die off. No, the socialist can kiss my ass. I'll never trust a socialist as long as I live. When it eventually got to the mainstream community, oh my God, you didn't think it would. So when it eventually got to the mainstream, something had to be done. You hypocritical bastards. You hypocritical bastards. And all of a sudden, there were these major campaigns across the country. Adverts every night on TV. This is a terrible thing. We've all got to be careful. You hypocrites. So I've no time for the left, which is why I became a libertarian. I've absolutely no time for the right because all they can think about is power and money. And, I'm stuck in the middle with you, John, although you're more right than me, I think. But I'm very honoured to be so, may I add. Yeah, it involved also, if I'm going to give the potted version of the whole thing, with me thinking, well, if this is real, if this is a reality, if it's not just blind faith and there is truth, as Kierkegaard said in that devastatingly clever masterpiece, Either or, Either it's true or it's not. There we are, the bottom line. If it is true, then what does it mean? So I went looking outside of the Abrahamic tradition for a couple of years. Is Christ there? And I can assure you, on my personal journey, I found the Christ energy everywhere. He's there. It is there. She is there. It's there in every tradition, in the good hearts of the unbeliever. That energy, that power, that force, that presence, that glory is in every man, woman, and child, unless they do their best to hold it back and diminish it. I eventually went back to the Christian tradition. I'd been invited at the time to take a Valentinian ordination, and I thought yes, because I don't believe blind faith is enough. My own view of Gnosticism is that really you're looking at theologies designed to help you explore, like deep meditation. The age of competing cosmologies is long since gone. So you're looking at really what they were trying to do in the first place. They were looking at the interior journey, journeys into the psyche, journeys into the soul. So I was ordained with them. The liberal Catholics, the old Catholics, got in touch with me and said, well, we understand what you're doing. Would you care to join us? So I joined them. But at the end of the day, I'm not really, I'm very honored to have been part of all of that. But I can't help thinking Catholicism belongs to a time when hierarchies were external. But as Bodhidharma said, the hierarchies are internal. You meet these things inside yourself, in your soul, in your mind. They're not externalized, not anymore. Will the hierarchy be externalized? Maybe one day, but that hasn't happened yet. So it was a long, long, long journey, which eventually brought me 360 degrees back to my short, fat, puff Zen origin. And I'm hoping to make sense of it finally, because Kierkegaard is right. It's not, it is an either or, and it's true. And we've got to be slightly more mature about the energies and the glory that we're dealing with. Jesus Christ is the one and only Savior, and we must find a way to that central point of all creation. And I'm not saying other people don't have messages and they don't have divinity and they don't have depth and they don't have profundity. All of them do. But if you're a Christian, the final arbiter of all spiritual experience must be Christ Jesus. And we must learn from the God-man, the man God himself, what that means in how to approach the absolute. That was very long. I do apologize to everybody, and particularly you, John. But you did ask me. I wasn't expecting to go into it. You did ask me. That's basically me. I'm available for parties, corporate dues, bar mitzvahs. I don't come cheap. Bear that in mind. I've got to write all this down at some point. Oh my God, I'm handing back to you. I'm floundering now. I'm handing back.
And you only gave us the short version, leaving out several denominations. Well, I was thinking of saving something for the end of our podcast this week, but it fits the tone and tenor of some of the things you just shared as far as the omnipresence of the Christ Spirit and how it's something real for you, and obviously, and in the image of Kierkegaard, either it's true or it's not. It's like that walk through the park where J.R.R. Tolkien is walking with C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis, both of them are Oxford dons, and J.R.R. Tolkien is especially a linguist with a specialty in ancient Anglo-Saxon tongue and things of that nature, and the roots of words, and C.S. Lewis deals more with the historical aspects of the tradition, and Britain has a very central place as far as the place of historicity, shall we say, the teaching of history. even though it's used, as we know, history is written by the conquerors. Though the people, they get to write the history books, and so we get their version. But nonetheless, it's really a kind of a great treasure. The British Historical Repository, even though they make very little recourse to it, other than for serialized movies and things of that regard, entertainment. But getting back to what we were discussing here is the omnipresence, and if you get into just the various traditions, you have ideas regarding the transcendent, as far as like the transcendent unity of religions for a guy, as expressed by a Swiss, Fritjof Schuon, a friend of mine who was his editor. And in the same token, you have this very intimate and bringing it to your doorstep aspect of the Christ mystery that you find amongst certain saints with their capacities for the power of healing and the miracles that takes place. And so you have this presence of Christ that is both immanent and transcendent. Likewise, of the Hashem or Jehovah of the Old Testament, the experience of the great being of the Godhead to Moses in the burning bush, that he was the highest part of the beingness of the universal nature of God that could manifest within the world of the senses, from the realm of the spirits of form, the Elohim or Exousiai, as they're called in Greek. And in looking at this, then you see that this is a presage for the incarnation of this great being a herald of this great being of the Christ that came to manifest as Jesus Christ at what Rudolf Steiner calls the turning point of time. But as a description of this that Rudolf Steiner had given as a kind of a meditative description back in 1907 in Hanover, was an esoteric lesson part of which he gave in September 24th, 1907. And I'll just share with you this because to me it's so powerful. Christ is the Sun Spirit, a fire spirit. It's his spirit that reveals itself to us in sunlight. It's his breath of life, the air that sweeps around the earth and presses into us with every breath. His body is the earth on which we live. He actually feeds us with his flesh and blood. For all the food we eat is taken from the earth, from his body. We breathe his breath of life that he streams to us through the earth's plant cover. We see in his light, for the sunlight is his spirit radiation. We live in his love, even physically. For the sun's warmth that we get is his spiritual force of love that we perceive as warmth. And our spirit is drawn towards his spirit as our body is fettered to his body. That's why our body must be consecrated, because we walk on his body. The earth is his holy body that we touch with our feet, and the sun is the manifestation of his Holy Spirit to which we are allowed to look up to. And the air is the manifestation of his holy life that we are allowed to take into us, so that we can become aware of ourself, our spirit, so that we could become spirit beings ourselves. This high sun spirit sacrificed himself, left his royal abode, descended from the sun, and took on physical raiment in the earth. Thus he is physically crucified in the earth, but he spiritually embraces the earth with his light and his love, power. And everything that lives on it belongs to him. He's only waiting for us to want to belong to him. If we only give ourselves to him completely, then he'll not only give us his physical life, but also his higher spiritual sun life. Then he streams through us with his divine light spirit, with his warming waves of love, and with his creative God's will. We can only be what he gives us, what he makes out of us. Everything about us that corresponds to the divine plan is his work. What can we do in addition to this? Nothing, but let him work in us. It's only if we resist his love that he can't work in us. But how could we resist this love? Resist him who says, I have always loved you and have drawn you to me out of pure goodness. He has loved us since the earth's very beginning. We must let his love become a real being in us. Real life, spirit, and bliss are only possible if this life becomes real for us, becomes Christ's life in us. We can't become pure and holy by ourselves, but only through this Christ life. All our striving and wrestling is in vain as long as this higher life doesn't fill us. It alone can wash everything out of our nature that's still unpurified, like a clean, pure stream. This is the soul ground from which this purifying light life can ascend. There we must seek our dwelling, at his feet and in devotion to him. Then he will transform us himself and stream through us with his divine love life until we become illuminated as pure as he is, become like him, until he could share his divine consciousness with us. Our soul must become pure and wise through his light. Then it can unite with his life. This then is the union of Christ and Sophia, the union of Christ's life with the human soul that has been purified by his light.
I mean, that beautiful. I mean, all those things are beautiful. The one thing that worries me about formulated assertions of that particular type is like the great doctrines of the church. A lot of people think that's the final point instead of the beginning. You know, one thing I've never believed is that religion, that religion is simply a body of ideas, a number of doctrines that you swallow, and then you remain faithful to or not, because that's not even thinking. My worry about what's happening to Christianity at the minute, which sadly, yes, this is a dig. I wasn't having a dig at the Catholics a minute ago. This is a dig. Seems to be exemplified in Southern baptism from what I've heard, so don't all jump on me. Where there's an endless checklist of what you've got to go through, point 72 subsection 3 before they let you become a minister. I mean, is that what Jesus did by the shores of the Galilee to his disciples? And if we can all turn now to the second part of the contract, you will see it, part 97, subsection 4, that you've all got to say this. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Doctrines, Jung said something interesting about doctrines. They were the great and secret treasure. That's what started me thinking, ooh, maybe doctrines have been misunderstood and what they're meant to be doing in the church has been misunderstood. In Steiner's case, I mean, how can I say a word? I mean, I'm rejoining the Anthroposophical Society. I hope that man is a staggering colossus of knowledge and insight and paranormal abilities and spirituality and genuine religiosity. So when I heard that, I knew I was sort of on the same hymn sheet. Yes, deliberately extending the metaphor. I knew I was on the same hymn sheet as you and him, but it did remind me, are we all really sure that, that this is what we think, or is it what we think, which is not what the Christ energy wants? It doesn't want you thinking that you're thinking that you're thinking that you're thinking. It wants you experiencing. Are you, you slap someone around the face. You've had an argument, you slap someone around the face. Big deal. Have you got the love in your heart to apologize and then try and do something good? That's what all this is about. Steiner for me remains, as I say, this titan of learning. And I'm a joiner, John. When I first came to London, Country Joe hits the big city. I joined everything. There wasn't a single thing left that you could join that I didn't join, and it was great. The Theosophical Society. Oh my God, whatever happened to them? These days, and this is said with love. This is said with love. Would Steiner have joined them to fall out with them? one of the weirdest arguments I've ever been a part of, and sadly, yes, I admit I was a part of it, was years back. You've got to remember the sort of demographics of all these societies. The Theosophical Society, the TS in Britain, used to be posh with a capital P. You had the High Church of England, and they'd all discovered Hinduism. And, when from the days of the Raj, oh my God, that statue of Shiva is just so breathtaking, isn't it, darling? So they were all incredibly posh, and they were from elite backgrounds. And one of the weirdest arguments I've ever heard in my life, I felt so sorry for the poor lecturer. They used to put on a lecture every couple of days. There was a main lecture once a week at the Theosophical headquarters in Gloucester Place. And there was this guy, I can't remember his name, isn't that awful? I'm sorry. Who was going to talk about what karma really means. I mean, my God, use your brain. That's going to go nowhere in theosophical circles. You should know that. Anyway, this poor man, he had a PhD and qualifications dripping out of him. He stood up and said, now today we're talking about karma. And of course, that was a red rag to a bull. It all kicked off from there. There was one of the great dowager duchesses of theosophy sat at the back who instantly rejoined, well, I'm sorry. Isn't it pronounced kurma? And then there was someone of equal social rank sat at the front who fixed him a look like daggers, then turned to the old biddy at the back and said, well, I'm sorry. Isn't it pronounced kurma? And this went on for 20 minutes, with them throwing sound bites at each other and these weird sounds that absolutely nobody had ever heard of in their lives. And, by the time all this had finished, the poor lecturer just stood there looking at everybody and not sure how to proceed. So, I give up. So that's my sort of knowledge about all that. Yeah, I was a joiner. I toy with rejoining the TS at some point. But my home is Theosophy, rather like my church home is MCC, I suspect. And I see nothing but a continuum and a warming between the two, for the simple reason they respect the treasures of the past. It's like that awfully misunderstood phrase, radical tradition. I mean, I know the phrase was coined by a very problematic individual. I am aware of that. And I have read some of the books of that problematic individual. Julius Evola. I've read some of them. I loved Man Amongst the Ruins. I read The Metaphysics of Sex. Oh, please, grow up. Have you ever had sex in your life? This is ridiculous. The whole book was premised around the fact this is true because I'm telling you. Oh, please, this is awful. So Man Amongst the Ruins is the best. Metaphysics of Sex is the worst. You can't help feeling that really Steiner and the Theosophical Society stand head and shoulders above all of that, which is why I'm returning to these great treasures. And that for me embodies, of course, the sort of free-thinking radical tradition as it's really meant to be understood, taking the best from the past, treasuring what was treasure, questioning what wasn't what wasn't treasure, questioning the treasure sometimes, but realizing their value and moving on to the future. I think we all need Steiner back in our mystical lives. That's what I'm saying and handing back to you, John. I've stolen time again. I'm handing back.
As always, Friar Talk. Yeah, well, very much in keeping with that, because Rudolf Steiner is very clear that spiritual science or anthroposophy, even though he's coming from a Christian perspective, that it's not exclusive and religion based, that spiritual science can be very much of value for anybody of any denomination or religion, what have you. And there are Waldorf schools in India, where they are basically a Hindu Waldorf school or a Buddhist one, or there's Islamic Waldorf schools in Egypt and other places, and so it's quite fascinating from that regard. But in Goethe being such a big part of understanding the work of Steiner, because he was the editor of Goethe's scientific works. That was really the launching of his career in academia. And he ended up naming his building that's the center, the Goetheanum in Dornach, Switzerland. And the first one out of wood was burned down, and then a new one was rebuilt from poured concrete. But so Goethe's whole views on metamorphosis and the way that things go through a transformation that can be quite unexpected is really critical for understanding. And it's interesting because one of my mentors, although he might have looked askance at me saying that, but I thought of him as one of my inspirations as a young man. It was a gentleman named Carlo Pietzner, who was one of the principal people at the Camp Hill, which is the curative centers that were founded by Dr. Karl Koenig, and they were homes for the handicapped, mentally handicapped, right? People with various different challenges all across the spectrum, you know, from hydrocephalic to autistic to what have you. And they're some of the highest awarded centers of that type. And the Camp Hill centers was the concept of having a custodial relationship, that these souls, you shouldn't put on them that, oh, they're not of value because they can't perform certain functions as well as other people, because many of these people were very, very gifted, even just to a phenomenal degree, like Rain Man. You know, it's like there was a guy at the library at Camp Hill that took care of the books. You could ask him any question about any book in there, and he could tell you verbatim. He could recite from memory, like what's on page 89 of the 1912 edition of whatever, and he would tell you. You know, so it's like, but yet he would have the greatest difficulty in other circumstances. So there's this whole balancing act, and mind you, if you bring into the idea that Rudolf Steiner's central mission, as he saw it, was the reintroduction of the concepts of reincarnation and karma into the Christian stream. And so that in and of itself, although it's very clearly pointed at by our Lord himself, you know, and the disciples knew that he was speaking of John the Baptist, you know. I'll just give you that little clue. But with Goethe, you have a letter to Sulpice Poisseret, and it's from 1831. And Goethe says in the letter, "I have found no confession of faith to which I could ally myself without reservation. Now, in my old age, however, I have learned of a sect, the Hypsisterians, who, hemmed in between heathens, Jews, and Christians, declared that they would treasure, admire, and honor the best, the most perfect that might come to their knowledge, inasmuch as it must have a close connection to the Godhead. Pay it reverence. A joyous light thus beamed at me suddenly out of a dark age, for I had the feeling that all my life I'd been aspiring to qualify as a Hypsisterian. That, however, is no small task, for how does one, in the limitations of one's individuality, come to know what is most excellent?" And there you have, from one of the greatest minds of all time, something that's very affirmative of your perspective is that keeping the door open, because you really don't know. And I've had the good fortune. I've hung out with representatives of all the various world faiths, except for Jainism. I don't recall ever hanging out with uh, one of the disciples of Mahavir, but even through the whole thing, Sufis, yogis, studied with the Sikhs, Buddhists, and they all had something to offer. I studied martial arts, Aikido, and karate, and Tai Chi Chuan of the Wu style, which were the instructors to the emperor. And so I've had exposure to all various facets of culture, and they all have wonderful things. And that's I'm all for culture, as you probably know by now, and of all the various forms. And geez, I even learned savate, which is French street kick fighting. I never learned that, the Brazilian form, though. I never did learn that. That's kind of a dance, really. But so there's all these various forms that can be more physical, more intellectual. Uh, there's all these various paths, and I've as at the bookstore, because we had teachers of all the various schools dropping by any given moment, and authors and experts and all of this. I got to interact with more of the various varieties, and it's like kind of like walking in a garden. There's all these different kinds of flowers, but they're all planted in the earth, and so there's that ground of being. And I think that what Rudolf Steiner was pointing at is that ground of being. And mind you, you heard the quotation from Goethe, but yet Goethe was also a great fan of Spinoza, and who Spinoza was definitely trying to come to terms with that whole idea of the unity of all things, which in the East you'd find in Advaita Vedanta, for example, which is like non-dual Vedanta, which is very, very popular in the theosophical milieu of which you refer. And then, of course, there's the Kashmir Shivite, which is actually, in many regards, a precursor to Advaita Vedanta. And it's on the Gaudapada and the various teachers that resulted from Kashmir Shaivism. That's the root of the Tantric tradition that fed into India and Tibet, so that there's a very powerful stream there that's hardly untapped in the West, because very, very little of their scriptures have even been translated to this day. But I had encounters when I met the Dalai Lama. I was one of the first people to meet the Dalai Lama, but at this great convention in which he showed up in Ann Arbor, there were all these gurus all milling around the stage, but I could look and I could see who, there was this one individual that was more radiant than everybody at the lip of the stage, to my humble perceptions. And who was it but a Shivite, that a great Shivite scholar, and so you don't know where you're going to find that glistening flower. And so that there's something you can learn from everybody you encounter. So be kind to that old lady with the cart, because she might be a Buddha. You don't know. And so I revere anybody that strives for excellence. I just can have nothing but the greatest regard for that, and not in any kind of condescending way or anything like that. If somebody else succeeds at anything, it makes me feel like a part of me has improved. If I don't understand the people that have the advantage point that they like to push people down, because then that makes them bigger. And that's kind of this vantage point of that's that Luciferic, the shadow side of Luciferic impulse. Because remember, in the characterizations of Lucifer, the false light, and Ahriman, the false darkness that Rudolf Steiner gives, is that because the light without, that casts no shadow, is the Christ light, right? And in the Bible, it says God is light. It's straight out, with no equivocation whatsoever. So what does that mean? Well, that source of that light is the Godhead that's referred to in the Old Testament as the Yahweh or Jehovah or the Hashem. That is the development towards the incarnation of Christ. That is a follow through of the prophetic traditions from other lands, such as the Ahura Mazda of Zarathustra, and the prophetic tradition in that regard that was carried by Zarathustra during the reign of Cyrus, and he was the teacher of Pythagoras. And so there's this whole developing tradition, and you can see in Hinduism the concept of Vishvakarma. And I remember saying to the Dalai Lama's cousin, Gelek Rinpoche, I said, well, Buddha's a Christian now. I wish I had a photograph of the look he gave me when I said that. And so, but if I were to say, well, Buddha's universal now, he would say, oh, yeah. So doesn't that mean the same thing if you have this understanding of the concept of I am the way, the truth, and the life? That's kind of all-inclusive. And so I find in my mind, and I'm only limited in my understanding and perceptions and scope, but for me, I can keep going back and back to it, and it just keeps having layers upon layers upon layers. And in fact, it was Hegel that was really in the West the person who really first pointed that out. Is that whole idea that the Bible is such a book that has so much going that the simplest individual can find something gratifying in it, and yet some of the deepest minds engage themselves with it time and time again. So that it's quite a you've joined quite a company if you're attempting to unlock its secrets. But Riddle Steiner had made the point that it's the freedom that's the necessary element and he even said it in that quotation to freely come to him. It's not like you say your checklist of things that you have to qualify in order to be considered one of them or whatever. It's not like that. It's a question of opening one's heart and being able to come to an experiential relationship of accepting that concept, which is grace. I mean, what else can you call it? It's that grace and that's why one of the central things mentioned within that statement about Christ by Rudolf Steiner is that's why that the consecration is important. That to consecrate life, to be able to live within the concept of having a reverence for life. And how does he put it here? Let's see. The quote's too long. It's too hard to find. Oh, that's earlier. Yeah. Yes, we see it. Anyway, that's why our body must be consecrated, because we walk on his body. And this whole idea of the consecration, and that like saying grace before meals, it makes it a sacred experience. If you have a problem with that, that's fine. Go watch football or something. That's okay. Go do your thing. But for me, it's a very real thing. And having gone through actual healing experiences of maladies that I'd suffer from for years and have them cured through experience of the Eucharist, for me, for going to communion and having the instant healing, what is that? It's again back to Kierkegaard. Either it's true or it's not. Well, I know it's true because it happened. and then I go back to the story that although I haven't told it in a while, I've told quite a few times. My great grandfather on my mother's side was his construction company that built the big cathedral downtown in Detroit, and most of the Catholic churches and their schools, and he built the Highland Park Ford plant, which was the first assembly line plant in the world. And so he was part of the upper echelons of Detroit society. And mind you, Detroit goes back to the French. It was originally a French outpost. So there's the Catholic, it was really an important center for the Catholic Church. And he built those, most of the Catholic churches and their schools during the early parts of the 20th century. And he was from Ireland. And but when he passed away, he had his home, the mansion he lived in on Boston Boulevard, and they were having the wake, because they're Irish. Irish have a wake. They invite everybody over, and the body lays and stay on the bed, and you go up and say goodbye. But it's not a like your funerals that you had such a trouble with. It's a way of like having a party, and it's like they're in the party too, kind of. That's the spirit of it. But Father Solanus Casey showed up, who was his spiritual mentor. And Father Solanus went upstairs, and mind you, he didn't like die just a few hours. This is like the wake they schedule, and everybody comes, like the next couple of days or so. And Father Solanus went up there, and he'd been up there for 5 minutes. And the next thing you hear is my great grandfather saying, "Get me some water," And so he came back from the dead. And he said it was the most wonderful experience that he'd ever had. And this kind of hard-boiled Catholic businessman became this gentle soul. And he wasn't in a hurry to pass on, but he looked forward to it now because he had some idea of what to expect when he crossed over. And so that was kind of one of the important stories of my youth. I'd heard it from my grandmother and all my aunts, and every time a context would come up, they would share that story with the kind of the most reverent tones, because it really that's quite a story to have in your family. And so to me, that I heard about that from the earliest childhood. So it was very formative to me that there is a side of life that embraces the miraculous, that embraces the supersensible. And so that there's something that I've always had a sense for. And maybe that's a real key to understanding my personal journey. I think it is. But in any regard, if somebody's not comfortable with that, that's okay. I really don't care. It's like I hope at some point they could have a miracle happen to them.
Gosh, two things came to mind during that incredible story. I'm sure that miraculous abounds everywhere, and that's an incredible story, and I shall treasure that, remember that, and actually speak about it at church. Two things came to my mind. Actually, I think Buck Rogers came from Chicago. the second thing is, am I some sort of frustrated Hegelian trying to work my way through all of these contortions? I have to think about that. Oh gosh, saints and sinners. I remember. Oh yeah, and there's something else that came to mind. Jains. I mean, you wouldn't have met a Jain because they're not there. They take them in not there so seriously, they're not there. So that's why none of us can meet them. There we are. The Tithamkaras are no longer there. There we are. So you can't meet them and you can't interact with them. So, oh God, thereby hangs a tale too. I remember there was a BBC documentary years back on the Jains, and there was one young lady. I was just in two minds about it because I hate examples of religiosity taken out of their cultural stream and then people talking about it, although they know what they're talking about. And she felt she had reached that particular spiritual plane whereby she could renounce the entire material world and had sold all of her goods and was being rolled down the street on a cart wearing these wonderful laser flowers, and she'd sold all her property and changed it into coins, and she was going down the street throwing rice and coins at everybody. Excuse me. I mean, I remember going on and on to somebody about religious witness, and some of my friends thought it was the most, oh my God, the hippie side, that's just the most cool thing they'd ever seen. And the other side thinking, oh my God, that woman's now got nothing, isn't that terrible? So you have this clash of Hegelian opposites, which I'm still trying to make sense of all these years later. Saints and sinners. I had the privilege of meeting somebody I think might have been a saint. I like that orthodox idea. Don't be rude to family. You know, we choose our friends, we don't choose our family. But do we really know who our family are? I mean, you know, great Uncle Seamus might actually be a saint. You know, he might have been a bit of a bugger sometimes, but he actually might also be a saint. So, you know, be respectful, because you don't know. You don't know. I like that orthodox idea. And as much as the Brit in me hates admitting it about a Frenchie, this particular Frenchman, Jean Vonnier, who started the L'Arche community, he was just overpoweringly wonderful. There is a lot of criticism about that community, and I believe it's struggling for resources at the moment. I hope I've been misinformed on that. His work, as I think he was a fully ordained priest, it's so long ago I can't remember. I mean, he felt priests ought to actually get involved and do something, so he founded a community which was trying to break down the cultural and social barriers between people with disabilities, largely Down syndrome, and the sort of disability you can't actually do much about. You know, I get very sad about people that can't do things. I don't get sad about able-bodied, this will have me down as a fascist. I don't get sad about able-bodied people that can go and get a job and get a house. Get off your ass, get off your back and get a job. You know, so I don't get sad about that. I do get sad about people that can't do that, like Down syndrome. There was a year or two, many years ago, where I used to teach Down syndrome students, and they were magical times. You do things like, you know, road signs, and that was the miraculous. We'd all be sat in class together drawing road signs and trying to work out what they meant. It was just wonderful. Jean Vonnier, as I say, I believe he was a priest, started this community as an experiment to see how the mentally fully equipped, the mentally able, the mentally equipped and the able-bodied could live in harmony and without condescension with those of genuine severe disability. Light nearly radiated from what this man was saying. He was one of the most humble people I've had the honor to bump into, and there was nothing but compassion in everything he said. And, you know, the fact he was so honest with it, he didn't know whether it would work, but it's important we tried. And, you know, you know, what are our reactions to disability? What are our reactions to the other? You know, some people get very frightened by disabilities. They get very frightened by the mentally and physically impaired. You know, what if it happens to me? So, of course, that's the existential. We all get frightened of that, and that's right and proper. But that, you know, does it mean we adopt programs of cleansing, as some people 70 years ago in certain countries thought we should? Let's sterilize them all and cleanse the community. Is that really what we want to do? And if not, what is the best way of sharing meaningful life with those of our brothers and sisters that are struggling to have a meaningful life? That for me, not only, I mean, I don't think anyone's even saying he's a saint. You know, I notice certain people are being put up for sainthood at the moment, canonization, you know, and again, most of them strike me as people who've towed the party line. Yes, holiness, no holiness. I completely agree with you, Eminence. You know, that can't be it, surely. You know, and you know, that chubby guy that keeps haunting me, He's been put up for sainthood. I hear he's not going to be a saint because he's too fat. That that can't be a reason for not being a saint, for God's sake. But I mean, genuine people like Jean Vanier, if our viewers haven't seen any of his work, I really strongly advise them to, because that's the existential in a healing and healthy way. And we have to answer those questions. How do we interact with people that not only sometimes genuinely frighten us because it could happen to us, or maybe it can't if you think about it differently? But why should they be treated so badly and brushed to the side of society, and we all pretend they're not there because that's not human, and it says something about us if we allow ourselves to do that. Don't know if you've heard of Jean Vanier. I'll hand it back to you, John.
Yeah, I've heard of him, but I hadn't heard of him in quite some time, and it's only, there's many things that I know very little about, and that happens to be one of them. But the French are fascinating. That watery element focused through the intellectual soul. So that if you really want to get into some word salad, you could always get a translation of somebody French, and they're going to go out of their way, if they're from Paris, to exhibit the most extensive vocabulary that you're going to see. I remember all those years in creating that 5,000 plus volume relational database on Egyptology and Mesopotamian studies that there so many of the Egyptology associations would publish their works in English, right? Except for the French. Everything that they did was in French, basically. If somebody took it upon themselves to translate something, okay, fine. They might give permission, but no, everything. French was the court language of Europe at one time. It's like, and even in Russia, the Tsar, the nobility in France spoke French, and the Tsar, he wouldn't speak Russian except to his servants and his dog. So it was court language, and you could sit there and converse freely. You didn't have to worry about people listening in because they didn't know the language. But that being said, I remember an interesting French character I ran across, Samuel Avatar. He's an interesting guy. He was a French mime who taught Kabbalah. And I ended up meeting him in Boulder, Colorado, back in the 70s. Fascinating character, incorporating the Kabbalah, the Kabbalah, as a lot of Americans like to call it, incorporating that into his education and teaching the mime of Marcel Marceau and all of that. He was one of the principal advocates of mime, and he was a beautiful soul and had a very unique take on the whole thing. I have great admiration for French culture, and so do they. And so that's all well and good. We've been having so much fun talking. I forgot to mention that David here, in case you don't know, is quite a exceptional author. His most celebrated work is Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts. And it's edited by Daniela Arendust. And this is a series of essays, as it said. And he also has The Grammar of Witchcraft, which is a Shakespearean study. As I always say, it's not a book on witchcraft. You're not going to learn how to be the Wicked Witch of the West. It's a Shakespearean study. And then his inspired poetry, Caliban's Redemption, which is also of a kind of a Shakespearean tone. These can be found on Amazon and well worth checking out. And for myself, I have two books. My first book is The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And that's some 640 pages. And then the sequel to that is the Arcana of Light on the Path, the Star Wisdom of the Tarot, and Light on the Path. And this is a meditative tool that goes through the Arcana of the Tarot, pairing it up with Mabel Collins' Light on the Path, which is the first meditative guide that Rudolf Steiner used when he was the head of the esoteric section of the Theosophical Society in Germany. And in both books, I have a series of extensive cosmological diagrams to help come to an understanding of spiritual science as viewed from a cosmological and kind of a Kabbalistic perspective. And based upon the diagrammatical understanding I was able to garner from Aaron Pfeiffer, the direct student of Rudolf Steiner and the founder of biodynamic gardening here in America. And my books are available on eBay, but if you're outside the country, you can contact me through the link below, the academia link I put below on both Facebook and on YouTube. And you can contact me directly through there or private message me on Facebook, and we can work out something we can do with handling the transaction through PayPal. But then that being said, if somebody wants to buy David or I a cup of coffee, it'd be much appreciated, as we do drink a lot of coffee on this show. But that's for David is paypal.me/DPARRY777. And for myself, it's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. So it's much appreciated. I also want to acknowledge the people that have done so in the past. Some people have been quite generous, really. And it really does make a difference on my end here, and I'm sure it does for David too. That being said, so David, at this point, we usually come to where I go, okay, what's your closing remarks? And if you could kind of consecrate this whole event with one of your wonderful spontaneous prayers.
Well, you know me, I've got a comment to make before the prayer. Oh, the French. You know, God's sake. Yeah, that's the Brit in me coming out, and I admit it. Oh, God, yeah. What does every British intellectual want to be, including me, a French intellectual? You know, but they're so bloody annoying. I mean, there's a saying in certain circles in this country, God created France to show how beautiful the world could be. Then he created the French to balance things out a bit. And you can sort of see, and yeah, they were all Parisians. Oh God, I remember the last time I was in Paris, and I got schoolboy French, got reasonable French. Excusez-moi, monsieur. What was it? Gosh, I can't remember. I don't speak French too well. And parlez pas bien français, monsieur. And he turned around and said, "It's okay, I can answer you in English." What a swine! What a swine! You knew what I was saying. What a swine! Anyway, they always bloody answer you in English. That's the annoying bit about the French. So anyway, I now pass to David. It will recover himself. Oh gosh, we live in times of great confusion and enforced restriction. Oh, we live in times when mental health is becoming more of an issue than ever before because of the social conditions that some feel are necessary and that others feel are being manipulated. Maybe it's a bit of both. We mustn't forget the subtler parts of our humanity, because the mind can affect the body as much as the body can affect the mind. And in these dangerous and challenging times, as we look through all the dragon energies and all the angelic energies, and we look beneath them all, what we eventually find is that one still central point of unconditional love. It is that which Christians call the Christ. It is that which orders and structures the sun and all the stars. And my friends, I ask that that central point of all reference, all light, all good, all hope, all meaning and all value will be with you this day and in the days ahead. Amen.
Amen. Well, my friend, until next time, I bid you adieu, and everybody else, I thank you for showing up. And of course, you can find these available to watch at your perusal. By the way, I went back and watched our first one again today, just to see our maiden voyage here. And it's nice because we're not as kind of time sensitive, and we tend to deal more with universals than particulars. And so that's a good in that regard, is that it keeps that the content relevant, even though it may be dated chronologically. And so in that regard, I think that that's a good thing. But yeah, God bless. God bless you all out there, and thank you for showing up on this January 24th, 2021.